we take one thing under the umbrella of neurodiversity, so dyslexia, I wasn't diagnosed till I was 40. Okay, so I was diagnosed obviously late on in my career, and I had no idea. Because when I was at school, basically, if you were struggling to read, you were a term that we don't use. Well, I won't say the term, but there were some very unpleasant terms for people that were, you know, struggling with reading and that kind of thing. Whereas obviously it's a lot more understood now. So my daughter came home from school one day when she was about 7, or she was about 7 or 8, and she was struggling with reading. And they'd done an assessment on her, and they said, we think she's dyslexic. So they give you like a plastic coloured sheet to put over the book. And so I was reading with her that night, and I was reading this children's story book. And I said to my wife at the time, I said, this is brilliant, isn't it? She said, oh, how are you getting on? I said, it's brilliant, isn't it? And she said, oh, but is she finding it easy to read? I said, no, it's brilliant. It stops all the letters moving around. And she looks at me. You do know letters aren't supposed to move around, don't you? I said, yeah, I did know that. But until they stopped moving, I didn't know they were moving. Okay, this is a really odd concept. It's like if you're ever in a room and there's a buzzing noise, you don't realise, all of a sudden the buzzing noise goes off and you go, oh, blimey, there was a buzzing noise then. I just hadn't realised because it was. And so when the text stopped moving, so in me, it wobbles and it vibrates and it flashes. So as I'm reading text, the word I'm reading is in black and all the words around it are flashing and everything's wobbling, and it's kind of difficult to explain. But anyway, so, and it stopped moving. And of course you can't unsee it then. So now I notice it all the time, but you know, I was 40 at the time. So I went to a specialist optician, and they try all these different filters, and it's different colors for different people. So that's why, that's how the glasses work. They stop everything moving. So when I put these on, everything kind of goes and freezes in place. So I can actually make sense of it. And it's just, it's weird in the first place, because you just say, what? So just having a coloured sheet, coloured plastic makes that much of a difference. And it does, it you know, it really does. So I was, so I went to this optician who was a dyslexia specialist, and he said, well, you know, do you struggle reading and writing? I said, well, I didn't think I did, but when I did all the tests, it improved my writing speed by over 50% just by having these. So again, one of those things, he said, well, no, I didn't realise. And he said, what do you do? I said, well, I'm an engineer. And he said, well, funnily enough, we get a lot of engineers like this. And he said, do you write a lot? I said, well, I do as part of my job. And, you know, at the time, I mean, I've written 18 books now. I must have written 10 books by then or something. So I said, well, I've written a number of books. And he says, do you struggle with writing? I said, well, I don't struggle with writing, but I do struggle with typing and with things going from my head to my fingers, for example, and that kind of stuff. And so he gave me the piece of paper, which is basically, it's the make dyslexics think slightly better about themselves than they already do piece of paper. It's not called that, but that's essentially what it is. But it says, you know, if you're dyslexic, these are the things that you won't be good at. So, you know, reading, spelling, and there's all sorts of different ones in there. Time management, as we've established. If you ever try and set up a meeting with me in real life, and I'm afraid everybody INCOSE UK Secretariat knows this through bitter experience, the probability of me turning up on the right day, on the right week, on the right month, at the right time, using the right social media is very, very slim. But so there's all sorts of things that you know, I wouldn't say we're bad at, that we you know, aren't our strengths. The list now, so here is strengths of dyslexia. Okay, brilliant spatial reasoning, solving puzzles, strong memory skills, creativity, narrative reasoning, big picture thinking, abstract thinkers, problem solving. Okay, that's my job description. You know, it really is. Now, also bear in mind that my entire career, for over 30 years, I've been working in model-based systems engineering, which is basically, and all the MBSs are going to hate me for this, it's drawing pictures of stuff, right? And drawing lines between them and making connections. And it's really interesting that, you know, through no design and no career choices, or, you know, no deliberate decisions, I've gone down this path. And all the things that I use on a day-to-day basis in my job as a systems engineer are strengths of dyslexia. So I kind of sort of embrace it, and whenever I give any sort of talk, which is one of the first things I do, I explain to people, because otherwise they're all just looking at me thinking, why is he wearing sunglasses, which is a bit off-putting. But I've just found it, if you just say it to people, and sort of own it, because it is quite, when you first do it, it's quite embarrassing, but you'll be surprised to say just how many people are in a similar position, or they'll come up to you at the end and do and talk to you about it. And so I found it in a weird way to be very liberating. When I do my I do a number of STEM events and that kind of stuff, and every time I do one, there's always somebody will come up with a little kid, normally a school age kid, but a little kid, and just say, look, my daughter, my son has been diagnosed with dyslexia. They're upset about it. What can you say? And you just have to go, well, I write books, I've got a good job, I'm a professional, and to say, focus on the things that you're good at, and look, you've got all these strengths, and, embrace it. And, to kids, it's like, treat it like a very strange superpower. Yes, you're not going to be as good at reading or writing, but actually it's not going to stop you reading or writing, certainly. And you're going to be far better at all these other things than most of the people out there, than the normal 85% that are out there. So it's been a weird sort of journey for me for this, but I think we're at a point in time as well where it's the right time to do this kind of stuff, because I think people are more aware now, and I think thankfully people are far more open about it now, because there's still a lot of people over the years that have been so embarrassed about it they don't tell anyone, and they're worried about losing their jobs, honestly, and things like that. So, and I think particularly post-COVID, where the whole mental health has become a lot more, we've become a lot more open and in talking about these sorts of issues. I think now's the right time to sort of embrace this and actually do it now, and try and make it the norm, try and make it an established way to communicate with people. But it's one of those things, as I say, 15% of the population are neurodiverse. I'm dyslexic. There's all sorts of other problems that come with it. I've got several other sort of mental health issues as well, so with memory and things like that. But we've got to embrace this now, and we've got to face the fact that everybody is somewhere on that spectrum, and we've got to cater to as many people as we can, and we've got to be as I've got to get the word right now, sort of as equal and as embracing and welcoming to as wide a group of people as we can. And like I said, we got to accept it's not a weird thing. It's not something we should be ignoring. It is something that we should be talking about, and that we should be embracing. So for me, reading books is weirdly, even though I've written many books, reading is a bit of a struggle for me. And when we started looking into this, it's interesting because the traditional style of publishing. I would also say that Simon Perry, we're both quite big nerds. One of the things that he's very nerdy about is actually printing, as in fashion press printing. So Simon actually knows an awful lot about the history of printing and this kind of stuff. And if you look at the history of printing, and every book that you will buy, a quality book needs to be on sort of brilliant white paper with very dark, very sharp lettering and nice fonts and justified down the edge and so on. And this is about the worst thing, the worst style you can present things in to anybody with dyslexia, for example, along with lots of other sort of neurodiverse conditions. And it's kind of weird, because the high contrast of very crisp white paper and very sharp black text is a disaster for me personally. I don't know for many others. So if you look at a lot of the guidelines, they don't identify all these different issues that people might have. So as we started looking into them, obviously I've got a lot of them, but it turns out that statistically in the UK, and I can't speak for the rest of the world, but I'm guessing it's similar. 15% of the population are classed as being neurodiverse. So that includes things like dyslexia, which it's a bit of a catch-all anyway. It involves quite a lot of sort of different conditions, but things like ADHD, color blindness, there's all sorts of different conditions that go under the broad umbrella of being neurodiverse. And as I said, this is 15% of the population. So it's not just a tiny, tiny, minority of people that are affected by this. It's actually a lot. There's lots of guidelines out there for how to present information in a far more accessible way. So when I was talking to Simon about our latest book, and we were saying, we always like to kind of, push the boundaries a little bit. And we were saying, well, what can we do to, make things more accessible? And so we started to do a bit of research into it, and there's lots of guidelines out there. There's lots of, obviously, you can imagine, charities and support organizations that get involved with the research and come up with these guidelines. So, for example, there's guidelines on different fonts that are better for neurodiverse people, different color palettes, these kinds of things. So we started to look into all of this and saying, well, why can't we produce a book that's like this? And when we did look into it, one of the biggest sort of blockers for this historically has been the cost of things like color printing. So which up until, I would say, even 10 years ago was very, very expensive. But with today's technology and with the printing techniques that we have, and for example, in INCOSEUK UK, we tend to do almost like print on demand. So we find a printer, we deliver the PDF and so on, and it gets printed. The last couple of books that we printed for INCOSEUK UK have been full color, and the difference in cost is absolutely minimal. In fact, the difference in cost to the person purchasing the book, it makes no difference. The only difference it makes is in the actual physical printing cost itself. And they're so close to just a standard black and white book as to be negligible. So we were saying, well, why can't we produce a book that is in full color, and we can take advantage of the printing technologies we have and the quality of the printing now in terms of the individual shading of different colors as well, and the subtle shadings you can have in background is incredible compared to just a few years ago. So the idea was we would take advantage of that, and we would use it to kind of promote accessibility. And we'd use this as a bit of a sort of toe in the water, if you like, to sort of test out these techniques and to see what they look like. So I can show you an example of what our latest book look like. This is a bit of a, right, first of all, I've got to find the share. We've already established that I'm not the best at reading things. I've got to find the share screen button. There we go. I think I found it there. And with a bit of luck. So there's a few things here that you can see. So first of all, if I zoom in a little bit, so that's probably almost 100%. First of all, the type font size is actually quite large compared to many books. So typically there's this idea of getting as much information as you can on a page, and we kind of gone away from that and said, well, no, you need an appropriate amount of information on a page, not necessarily as much information as possible. So first of all, we've increased the font size, and also, and you won't be able to tell by looking at this, but we've increased the spacing, not just between words, but between the letters as well. And it's only a tiny, tiny, minuscule. So again, you can't really tell. But it's one of these things, when we looked at the guidelines, there's all these guidelines for, well, you don't just change your spacing between the words, you change it between the letters in the words. And that's what we've done here as well. We're using a particular font. In this case, it's a standard font, but it's one that's a lot more friendly to dyslexics, for example. Also on here, weirdly, and again, you won't be able to tell by looking at it, but that background isn't white and that ink isn't black. Okay, the print isn't black. So the background is off-white, and the lettering is very, very dark grey, to quote Father Ted, but it's very, very dark grey. And this is important because one of the things that's a problem for neurodiverse people is contrast. So when you have a very high level of contrast and a very sharp contrast, that's very difficult to read. We're also told that when we, traditionally when we write things, we justify down the left side, obviously, but also down the right side to make the text more readable, well, not more readable, to make it look nicer, okay? And that's all it does, because actually, from a dyslexic point of view, it makes it far less readable, having something that's lined up at the end. So when I read, if anybody ever seen me read something out loud in public, it's always a bit of a disaster. I will read the same line over and over and over again, because I'll read, for example, I'll read towards the end of here, and then I'll go back my eyes and come back to here again and read that line out again. So actually having this staggered on the right-hand side and not justified is very important, okay? Also things like using colors to reference things. So obviously we're using bold there, okay? Underlining is a no-no as well. So again, don't underline things. We're using bold when we want to emphasize things, but also when we're referencing things, we're actually using the colors that apply to the reference. So for example, here's a diagram we can see on this side. Again, a gray background. Notice the color, it seems odd to begin with, but pastel shades like, pastel shades of green and blue are far more readable to neurodiverse people than black on white. And so for all the diagrams, we've gone green ink with a grey background. And again, I don't know if you can tell, in the shading inside the different shapes on here, it's a slightly lighter shade of grey. So lots of greys, lots of pastels. Also, we're not using entirely straight lines on many of these diagrams as well. They're broken up or they're slightly curvy. And again, that's just getting away from this contrast thing. We're also, when we're having the breakout boxes, we're using different colors. So again, that's Simon there. So that's Lego Simon, that's Lego me. So, and we're using this color coding. So whenever Simon gives a bit of advice, it's in blue. Whenever I do, it's in this very pale green. And we're trying to set the style to be just more readable and more accessible. The headings, again, using these lines to break things up rather than just relying on the text itself is quite a step forward. Good example of my spelling there. And the colors we're using. So again, notice different shades of green. I'm trying to think what else there is on here. So there's the font sizes, there's the colors, using bold rather than things like underline, justification. And if you look at, if I zoom out a little bit, if you look at the layer of the text itself, can you see there's a far wider margin there on one side, on the right hand side, and then on the left hand side there. So when the book opens, there'll be far more white space on it. And again, that's something that from a neurodiverse point of view makes things a lot more accessible and a lot more readable. Simple things like just the page numbering, just having a colored background on that. And so you can see, there's my cat there, look. You can see all these different things coming out in the text. So we're still experimenting with it, to be honest. So the final version isn't going to look 100% like this. So there's an example in that diagram. The main ink is green. When we're having additional comments on, we're doing that in a pastel shade of blue as well. So we're still playing around with some of these palettes because there are established palettes that people recommend that you use, and the backgrounds, the grey backgrounds and so on. But this is just giving you an idea of what the whole book is going to look like. And we're going to obviously have to play test this with various people. So send it around people who are neurodiverse and get an idea of what they think of it. And once we've done that, potentially we can roll this out to new publications, for example, and even reverse engineer it to existing publications. So again, look at the main chapter headings there, the different backgrounds we're using, the different styles. But again, these soft colors, these pastels, you can see it come out in that diagram a lot more with the gray, the blues and the greens and so on. And it might look slightly odd to begin with, but I think it's one of those things where if you're not neurodiverse, it might look a bit odd, but it's not going to make it any less readable, certainly. If you are neurodiverse, it will hopefully make a big difference. And certainly a few people we've run it past, a few dyslexics we've run it past already, have said it actually makes quite a difference to them. So that's the sort of style that we're going for. We've looked at a number of different, as I said, organizations that do research into this, into the color palettes. And we're looking at, and within the company where I work within Scarecrow, we're looking at changing all of our training material. We do a lot of training to reflect these color palettes as well. And interestingly, there's different color palettes for when you've got something in print and when you've got something on a screen. And so there's actually an awful lot of depth to this, and there's quite a lot of complexity to this. And it's and it is a fascinating area because you just don't realize, I didn't realize until we started looking into it, just what a difference these things make. And many of them are very simple to do because, for example, the the lettering, the spacing on the lettering, yes, it's a bit of a pain to set up. But once you've set it up and you've got all your styles done, then actually it's done for good. Then you don't need to worry about it again. You can just type into the document as you can. So yes, it's a bit of an experiment, but hopefully it's going to make a difference to the way that we do things, and hopefully it's going to make a difference to the way that we publish things in the future. So that's just a rough idea of what it's looking like at the moment. As I said, we're still experimenting with this. We're still getting different people with different neurodiverse conditions to look at it and give us their feedback on it. And we will be sort of adapting and adopting these ideas as we go through as well, just to make it as well as good as we can, really. And I think apart from anything else as well, it's going to be very visually pleasing. You know, if you look at things like children's books, and particularly children's educational books, and you know, bearing this in mind, if you go and look at something like without wanting to advertise, the Dorling Kindersley books, that they do the big glossy children's books that explain, almost like mini encyclopedias. Look at the color schemes that they use on there, and look at their headings, and look at the fonts that they use. And there's a reason why people do that, because it's just far more accessible. It's far more pleasing on the eye, and it makes it more readable, particularly if you're going to be reading big blocks of text, or you're going to be reading for a prolonged period of time. It does actually make quite a difference to you. But there we go. Okay, so let me stop sharing that. So that's the sort of major project we got at this moment for testing the water, for giving it for as a trial almost. But as we said, we're hoping to based on feedback, to roll this out to new publications and to the existing ones. And again, because of the way that we can set these things up with styles and templates and these kinds of things in the word processors, it should be Simon's going to be cursing me now because he does all of the formatting. It should be relatively easy to apply this format sort of to the books that we've got historically. And also it just sort of challenges the way that, particularly in the world of engineering, when we used to dry subject matters and very standard looking books, black on white, all justified, tiny font sizes, and so on, and really just sort of challenging the norm and just saying, can we do things in a better way? So one of the things that we're going to be producing, Simon and I are producing, and we got initial drafts of this, is a style guide as well, where we'll be referencing all the different organizations and all the different research that has been done. And so when we hit a certain level of maturity with writing the book, when we're happy that that's the sort of optimum way to do it, we will be releasing that as well. Otherwise, just do a search on dyslexia color palettes, dyslexia fonts, and so on. And there's some very good resources, certainly in the UK. I can't remember less in the right order. I need to DNA, like the old joke. It's the NDA, the National Dyslexia Association, but they've got all sorts of resources available for you as well. So it's so I think it is important that we can do this. And also, rather weirdly, the statistics show that in technical areas like engineering and science, you tend to get more people who are neurodiverse. So, and there's all sorts of scientific research for this. So we ran an event a couple of years ago, and someone who we know very well, who I'm assuming you won't mind me mentioning this, Stuart Kane. We had 200 people in the room. He just did a quick survey of people and asked everybody to say if they had a neurodiverse condition. And it was almost 25% of the attendees. And this was a model-based systems engineering event that we were running as a company. Again, Stuart, who was not affiliated with our company, just sort of said, could he do this survey? Because it's an area that he's interested in. And like I said, and the results were quite surprising.